Hey everybody, welcome to this free bonus content for the first ever episode of the War on Mediocrity podcast. If you're a fan of my other podcast, the Managing Violence podcast, you'll know how this works. But every single interview I record bonus content with a guest and upload that on our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/War on Mediocrity, where you can sign up for as little as $5 a month and get all this bonus content for every episode. But because this is our first one, we want to give you a taste of what you can expect. I'm putting it up for free on YouTube. If you'd like to see it, here it is right now. Geoff, first question I have for you. What advice would you give to someone who is overcoming trauma or past failures and they feel like that's a stumbling block for being able to achieve greatness in their current life? And I know you've had your own experiences with trauma growing up, certainly had enough experiences of failure or things not going to plan. What advice would you give to someone now looking back on those times at 60 years of age and on obviously a lot of introspection since?
Oh, I'd say that trauma, failure, it's a gift. I'm not just saying that lightly. You know, all of the stuff I got came from those roadblocks. We tend to think of trauma, crisis, depression, things going on in our life. We tend to think of them as harbingers of doom, but actually they're messengers of hope. And if we're able to turn into that trauma, it takes a lot of courage. If we're able to intercourse with it, absorb 99% of it, to quote Ushabat, you know, that trauma has a message. That crisis has a message. So if you have trauma in your life, if you have failures in your life, I don't really see any such thing as failure anyway. For me, everything is just about learning. So in my own martial arts class, we used to create trauma, or we used to create restriction in order to force people to find a new source of knowledge. So for instance, if we were doing punching, we'd make people sit on the floor or kneel on the floor or stand with their back to the wall before they punched. So they took away all their hip and their momentum, and it forced them to find the singularity, the hara, or the dantian, I think the Chinese call it. So it would force them to find chi. So we would get people who were more powerful in restriction than they were when they were free to punch. So that if you get someone that could punch pretty well and they wanted to go to a new level, we would create restriction within the class. If you was a good grappler, I would just have you boxing. If you was a good boxer, I would just have you grappling. If you was a good boxer and kicker and puncher, I would put you against somebody who was a psychological fighter, somebody who let you feel his temper, somebody that forced you to go into the into your own psychology. So we would create restrictions. Sometimes the restriction was created by the environment itself. So if we did a year's course, I would say to people, are you all committed to these next 12 dates? Yes. Is it in your diary? Yeah. Nothing going to interfere with it? Yeah. Okay, I said, so remember that, because within the next 12 months, most of you are going to try and find reasons not to be here. And those restrictions and those excuses, most of the time you'll try and blame me. I said, but this environment is going to create restrictions that will force you to look at where you're weak. And within that weakness, within that wound, is treasure. So if someone is in a trauma now, it's a gift. I would tell them to read Warrior. I wrote a book called Warrior, which has gone out to a lot of people who I've known who have been in real trauma, and it's really lifted them through. Or something like Beginner's Guide to Darkness. Trauma is a gift. It doesn't feel like it when you're there. The rabbis would say, because every rabbi, every imam, every priest, everyone of a high level, at least totally, goes through a severe regeneration before they go into the next level of spirituality. And they all say, I would never change it, but I would never want to be there again. So it challenges everybody. But if you can look at the challenge as an opportunity, this is a good, this trauma you are in now is a doorway. It's an opening. And you've got to grab it while it's there, because it'll be closed again soon and life will go back to normal. So go through that doorway now while you can. St. Paul said, when I'm at my weakest, I'm at my strongest. It meant that we had to let go of the ego. The ego is shattered during these periods of crisis. And when the ego is shattered, that's the perfect time for spirit or ki or chi to come through. So I would say it will be painful and it will have you on your knees, because it has me. I remember reading about Ushaba standing in front of a firing squad when he was training with Anisaburo Debuchy, who was a Japanese prophet, and they said they were going to die within seconds, and they all said that Ushaba seemed to be the most afraid. But suddenly it was called off and they were given a reprieve. But Ushaba came away with that, saying that what we have to do with this trauma is we have to absorb 99% of it. When we absorb 99% of it, it gives up the ghost. The nature of the fear is liberated, and the effulgence that's within it comes over, and we get the reward. But we have to be prepared to stand in front of the monster, the three-dimensional monster, until he becomes a two-dimensional cartoon. And then eventually it will just dissipate. This happens to every spiritual aspirant. Trauma is part of the spiritual journey. If we can just change our perspective and say to ourselves, this is hard and it's killing me, but I want it. I want this. My last regeneration I went through, Joe, took me 6 months of severe regenerations, really 6 months of real struggle. Every single day I said to my wife, I want this. I need this. I've been hiding from this last call for a long time. I want this. And every day I was getting up at 4:30, and I was assailed is a good word. I was assailed, but the guidance and the assistance came to me at the exact time that I was assailed. I was guarded, I was protected, and I came out of it with, well, you've seen the divine CEO. That was what came. That just came through me, that book. I had very little to do with it, but understanding what it meant came to me after this regeneration. So in other words, all of the burnt offerings, all of the old stuff was burnt up in the trauma. All of it was sacrificed. They talk about animal sacrifice or the burnt sacrifice. It means to sacrifice the animal soul. It means to burn the sin. The burnt offering is always a sin offering. So all those places within us where we are in error are burnt up in the volition of this regeneration. So I know it's a troubling time for people when they're going through this, but believe me, I promise you it's a gift.
It's very profound. Geoff, next question for you is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, I would just say, stop trying to control everything. I was abused when I was 11. So every situation I was in after that, I tried to control. I didn't know I was doing it, Joe. I had no idea I was doing it. So I was trying to control everything. I was trying to orchestrate the world so that I could control it, so that I couldn't be harmed again. And that part of that entailed building my body into an armory. So I was like a Sherman tank. I could kill in 20 languages. But that didn't help me. That just put more of a carapace over this traumatized part of myself. The moment I let go of control, the moment I realized I couldn't control anything, and just let the spirit come through, it cleaned itself. So I would just say, don't try to control everything, and stop running away from the feelings, turn into the feelings. I did it anyway, but I would like to have done it sooner. But that wasn't my dharma, so I wouldn't change anything. It wasn't my dharma, but I would just say, turn in, stop running away, just turn in. And eventually that's what I did. I just said, I'm fucking tired of running. I'm tired of chasing. You're chasing me and you're threatening me. I'm tired of that. Come in, have a sit down, have a cup of tea, stay as long as you want. You stay as long as you want. I'm here. If you want me, take me. This body is my enemy anyway, so take whatever you want. I'm paraphrasing St. Francis now, and then this is what I did, and this was I think Viktor Frankl would call this paradoxical intention. So the things you're most afraid of, you just intend them. I didn't realize I'd triggered upon the paradoxical intention, and the moment I did that, they dissipated. They went. Then years later, I read, of course, Francis was. When he was first becoming deeply spiritual, his dad and his dad's friends battered him, kicked him, booted him in the head, threw him in a dungeon, and wouldn't let him out. And he said in the dungeon he was assailed by demons. And he just said to them, if you're assailing me, it's because you are ordained, because God is omniscient. He's omnipotent, he's omnipresent. That means he must include you. So you must be here under his sovereignty. So you carry on, you do your worst. And he said they started to assail him more. So he turned to God and he said, I just can't tell you how grateful I am. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to see this manifest. Boom, they went. Milarepa was exactly the same. Milarepa was a Buddhist saint. He was a murderer turned saint. And he went into the caves, and he actually came to me in a meditation once. He actually appeared to me. It actually was the most beautiful experience. But he comes back to his cave, and there's 5 demons squatting in his cave, and he's like, oh, how's that happened? So he starts thinking, what can I do? What tricks have I got? What games can I do? How can I get these out of my cave? And then he realized he'd fallen into fear. So we just walked into the cave, and he said, how you doing? Stay around, help yourself, whatever you want, you're welcome. My home is your home. Let's see who prevails, your black magic or my white gold. Let's see. Boom. The moment he disengaged the fear, the moment he just said, stay as long as you want, because this is what happens with depression. Depression says, I'm going to be around forever, and we're terrified because we think we can never get rid of it. But when you are able to say, stay as long as you want, I don't care how long you stay, you're welcome. You are just going to prove me. You're going to refine me. This feeling is going to refine me. This is the feeling that's controlling the whole world at the moment. This feeling of anxiety, this feeling of arousal. You're scaring the whole world with it, but I'm going to turn into you, and I'm going to let you refine me. I'm just going to sit in it, and I'm going to marinate in it, and I'm going to pickle in this feeling. And so let's just see what you've got. So this whole idea, and these are techniques that were proven in Auschwitz, by Viktor Frankl. These are things that were proven in real life and death situations when I was on the door. You see the power fall from people when they're there with all their scowl and their posture and their technique and their reputation. You just go, yeah, whatever, I'm here. Step over, let's have a look at you. Leave your friends there. I stood in front of a monster once, a proper monster, who I became friends with later. But he was a real gangster, and everybody was afraid of him, and rightly so, And he had a proper army with him, and they looked like they'd just come from, what's that Star Wars film, the cafe scene, with all and I looked at them and I thought he was taking over the whole place. I was head doorman. I said, listen, he was with about 6 or 7 monsters. And I said, listen, I've got no argument with you lads at all. I said, I don't know you. I said, so there's no disrespect intended. This is just between me and Paul. And this guy's name was Paul. I said, so you come in here, Paul, and you're trying to take over. And I can't have it personally. I said, it's an offense. This is my club. So I said, why don't we leave your guys here? And I'll leave my guys here. Me and you can go outside. This is a classic Sun Tzu, when you strip people away from their supporters, from their allies. And I said, let's go outside and we'll just do a one-on-one, just me and you. And he just fell apart because I'd made a commitment to go out and do that. Well, that doesn't matter whether that's a gangster called Paul or whether it's depression turns up and kicks your door down, whether it's the threat of insolvency or if it's a threat of illness. It doesn't really matter what the gangster is. If the gangster's knocking your door and you can turn into it and just say, well, let's have a look at you, let's work with you, let's see what we've got. I became really good friends with this guy. He respected the fact that I said, we don't have to make this a war. This can just be between me and you. And I became good friends with him. I came to admire him. He had qualities. There was a signature behind his darkness that I could really feel. It came from the same signature as all the saints I'd seen. There was a generosity. There was a courage. There was an attractiveness. It was seductive, but obviously it was coming through very dark filters. But I was interested in that signature. So whatever it is, if we're able to turn into it, this is what I learned myself. When I leaned into the sharp edges fell away. But it takes a tremendous amount of courage, and I have to stipulate, Joe, that I ran away from it a lot of times as well. There was a lot of times when I hid from it. And in Judaism, they say sometimes you need to hide, sometimes you need to run away. Sometimes you need to go and prepare. But when the time is there, try and lean in rather than lean away.
All right, final question for you, Geoff. I know you're an avid reader. Quite clearly, I mean, you can't write 50 books without reading a lot of books as well. My question for you, someone who is looking to use 2021 or whatever year you might be listening to this podcast in, if you're listening to this podcast in 2071, fantastic. I'm so glad that we've survived this long. But for anyone who's looking to turn their life around, they're wanting something more. They're looking to break through the shackles of mediocrity or guilt or blame or self-sabotage or whatever it is that's been holding them back. If you could recommend 3 books that you think everybody should read to lay a foundation for an improved life, what would be your top 3?
I would say books that have massively influenced me: Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Very powerful book. This is a book about. It's really a book about Buddha. He wouldn't have called it that, but this was about a man This is an intelligent man who goes into a concentration camp, and he's got a copy of the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and he's relying on the Torah to keep him sane, to keep him balanced, and he's watching this deprivation all around him. Eventually, the book gets taken off him bit by bit till he's only got a page left, and then that's taken from him. And then he hears this voice, this inner voice that said, "We don't want you to read the Torah anymore, Victor. We want you to be the Torah." So I love that book because this restriction, and this was one of the most hideous restrictions in the history of the world. This restriction was an ultimate restriction, but it gave Viktor Frankl a doorway into the esoteric. He went very metaphysical. So he was creating serendipities, synchronicities, miracles, siddhas. He actually manifested his wife in long conversations, and she was in another concentration camp, and he didn't know she was dead, but he was having long metaphysical conversations with her, and she was a real person. She actually appeared to him, and the only reason he got this was because everything had been stripped away from him. All of the tools he'd got, all of the tricks, all stripped away. So the ego was completely demolished. When the ego was demolished and no longer had any control, he was able to start working from spirit, and that's when he was at his most powerful. And Viktor Frankl, lest we forget, when he came out of Auschwitz and started to write books and to tour, some of the best speakers in the world today, the people that me and you revere, their claim to fame was that they stood on the stage with Viktor Frankl. That's how revered he was. And why was he revered? He was revered because he made this stuff work in a situation that was life and death. He found certainty amongst chaos because it's there, but we have to sometimes allow the ego to shatter before that happens. So I would say that. And I would say I can't deny how much I've been influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. It's a massive influence. Hinduism generally is a very didactic kind of religion. You know, when you read the Bhagavad Gita, it's about Prince Arjuna who goes into battle to win his stolen kingdom. But it's really it's an allegory for man's battle against perception. It's man's battle to win back his own autonomy. And it doesn't matter if people read it and they don't necessarily understand it, because the soul understands it. So the ego might be shattered by it and go, "I don't understand this, makes no sense." The picture on the front is a blue guy on a chariot, and it's religious and it's dogmatic. It's none of those things. It's actually, the soul reads it like a barcode, but sometimes the ego has to be shattered. So we have to be prepared to sit and read it, not necessarily understanding it. But as you read it more and more, you will understand it. The Bhagavad Gita leads on to lots of other commentaries, the Bhagavad Gita is a chapter in the Mahabharata, which is an Indian epic, and the Mahabharata is a section of the Vedas, which go back 5,000 years, and there are about 500,000 verses. But there is so much wisdom out there written by aligned sages. So the Bhagavad Gita, I would say, the Bhagavad Gita is one of the books I go to. When you think of Gandhi, Gandhi made himself so small that he was global. He contracted so much that he expanded across the whole of the planet. He only carried one book, and that was the Bhagavad Gita. And every time he was in trouble, and he was in trouble, he said he would open that book at random and it would say something to him. So it's a fantastic reminder. And if you don't mind, Joe, the third one I'd recommend is my own one. And the only reason I'm recommending my own one is because I don't recognize it as my own one. The Divine CEO was a book I wanted to write for years and years, and it just never came through. I just couldn't find it. And it's because I had too many restrictions. There was too many things in me. It wouldn't get through. There was too many blockages. So I sat down and wrote notes. Notes was like my burnt offering. Notes was like is a confessionary book, Notes from a Factory Floor. And it's my burnt offering. So it's where I brought out all of my sin, all of my error, all of my faults, and put it on the paper and cleaned it. The moment I cleaned that, I finished on the Friday. I walked up to my local park and 20 chapter headings dropped into my head like coins falling through water. I had to write them down on emails and send them to myself. And I started on the Monday and I wrote 150,000 words, and I had nothing to do with it other than the fact that it came through me and it picked up my flavors and my stories. But I didn't know that stuff until it came through me. So I would say read The Divine CEO. That feels like a strong recommendation, and especially because we've been talking about it.
I agree. I think it's definitely making the shortlist for me if anyone ever asks me that question. So, Geoff, it's such a pleasure spending time with you, and I thank you so much for making yourself available for this brand new podcast.
Well, good luck with it, Joe.
Thank you. I think it's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. It's something I've wanted to help people on a level beyond what we normally consider self-protection. But as you quite rightly said, this is Budo. This is what self-protection is. Because if you can't protect yourself against yourself, then who are you going to protect yourself against? So,
a lovely line in the Bhagavad Gita: lift the self by the self. Never let the self droop down. The self is the self's only enemy. The self is the self's only friend. We have one job: win our own autonomy back. Well, the first job is to recognize that we haven't got autonomy. We've no agency. Once we recognize that we're just a big bundle of conditioning, we can fight to win our autonomy back again. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Perfect. All right, my friend, I'll let you get on with your day. Thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and holiday period, and hopefully we get to chat again in the new year.
Lovely. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Thank you very much, Geoff. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And if you enjoyed that bonus content, please make sure you give us some love on Patreon. Subscribe to our channel, and if you'd like to contribute to the Patreon, please do so, and you'll get all this bonus content from every single episode going forward. Thanks very much for watching. Hope to see you again soon.